Ellen knew exactly what to say, exactly when to say it, and exactly how to make David question everything he thought he knew about his wife. Mia had made one mistake 18 months ago. Ellen had been using it ever since. The boxes were finally gone. Mia stood in the center of the kitchen and looked at the empty countertops the way you look at a scar that has just stopped hurting, with cautious relief and the private knowledge that it still aches when the weather changes. The house smelled of fresh paint and someone else's history. Outside the window, the neighborhood offered its best impression of a postcard: trimmed hedges, quiet streets, the kind of silence that costs money to maintain. She ran her fingers along the counter's edge. Cool, smooth, indifferent. David appeared in the doorway behind her, rolling his sleeves down. He had the look of a man who had carried the last box not just from the truck, but from an entire chapter of his life. His shoulders dropped as he exhaled. "That's everything," he said. "That's everything," she agreed. Neither of them moved to celebrate it. He crossed to the cabinet where he'd placed a bottle of red wine 2 hours earlier. The first thing he'd carried in, before the furniture, before the bedding, before anything else. A ritual, a statement, or maybe just a strategy for getting through the first evening without the silence becoming unbearable. He poured 2 glasses without asking. She accepted hers without protesting. They sat at the kitchen table, the only piece of furniture that was already in place, and looked at each other across the wood grain the way people do when they've run out of careful things to say and haven't yet decided whether the honest ones are safe. "We said it would be different this time," Mia said finally. "It is different." David turned his glass slowly. "Different city, different house, different people around us. Same us." He didn't answer that. He took a sip instead, and the wine sat between them like a small, dark offering. The truth was that they had moved not for ambition or adventure, but for escape, and both of them knew it, even if neither would frame it that way out loud. "You didn't say escape. You said fresh start. You said new chapter." You arranged the words in a way that made the running sound like arriving. 18 months ago, Mia had made a mistake. Not a dramatic one, not the kind that comes with shouting and slammed doors. The kind that arrives quietly, wearing the face of casual conversation. It had been a lunch, a friend of a friend. A woman named Caroline who laughed in the right places and asked questions that sounded like genuine curiosity. They had talked about David's work, a contract negotiation, some details about the project structure, nothing that felt sensitive in the moment. Mia had been relaxed. She'd had a glass of wine. She had spoken the way you speak to someone you've decided to trust. 3 days later, a journalist's piece appeared online. Precise, well-sourced, devastatingly timed. Caroline, it turned out, was not a friend of a friend. She was a freelancer who specialized in corporate exposure. And everything Mia had offered so freely over grilled salmon and sparkling water had found its way, reshaped and sharpened, into print. David's project collapsed within a week. The investors retreated. The firm distanced itself. His name moved from the kind of conversations where things were decided to the kind where things were explained. The worst part, the part that still lived in the walls of Mia's chest, was that she hadn't recognized it in time. She had sat across from Caroline and thought, "She seems kind." She had ignored the feeling that the questions were slightly too specific, slightly too patient. She had dismissed her own instincts and paid for it with her husband's career. David had forgiven her. Or rather, he had chosen not to make it a wound they fought over. He had held the damage quietly, absorbed it the way men like him absorbed things, inward, without display, and he had kept moving. But forgiveness is not the same as erasure. The scar remained. And sometimes, in moments when he paused a half-second too long before agreeing with her, or looked at her with an expression she couldn't fully read, Mia felt the exact shape of what she'd cost him. The move was supposed to be a reset. New coordinates. New chances. She lifted her glass and drank, and the wine tasted like someone else's hope. "We'll be fine," David said. "I know," she replied. What neither of them said was, "We're terrified." The city received them politely. That was the word for it, politely. Not warmly. Not curiously. The way a city receives anyone with a decent address and a willingness to spend money on the right things. Mia found a coffee shop she liked. David found a gym. They established routines with the efficiency of people who understand that routines are what hold a life together when nothing else is quite settled yet. They went to a few small events. Smiled the right number of times. gave vague but pleasant answers to questions about where they were from and what had brought them here. A change of pace, David would say. We were ready for something new, Mia would add. The city nodded and moved on. It had heard similar stories before. It wasn't particularly interested in the specifics. Then, 6 weeks after the move, at a private gathering organized by one of David's new professional contacts, the kind of event where everyone claimed not to be networking while networking with ruthless precision, they met Elin. She didn't approach them so much as arrive at them. One moment Mia was standing at the edge of a conversation she'd half joined, holding a glass of white wine and calculating how many more minutes of polite attendance were socially required. The next moment, there was a woman beside her, composed, simply dressed in the way that announces expense without trying to, dark eyes moving between them with the particular quality of attention that makes you feel simultaneously noticed and assessed. You must be David, she said first, extending her hand to him with the confidence of someone who already knows the answer. I've been hearing your name. David shook her hand carefully. I hope in a reasonable context. In an interesting one. She shifted her attention to Mia. And you're Mia? It wasn't a question. Yes, Mia said. Elin's smile adjusted, became marginally warmer, marginally more personal, as if she'd unlocked a setting specifically calibrated for this moment. I've been told you've had a difficult year. Both of you. The sentence was delivered without judgment. That was what made it land precisely where it was aimed. David stepped in smoothly. We're adjusting. Adjustment. Elin tilted her head slightly. That's a generous word for what it actually takes. Then, as if the observation had exhausted itself, she changed tone. You should come by sometime. I know people here who could help a new start actually feel like one. She handed them her card and moved on before the sentence could be examined too carefully. Mia looked at the card. No title, just a name and a number on heavy cream stock. She knows about us, she said quietly. David shrugged. This city is smaller than it looks. Everyone knows something about everyone. Mia slipped the card into her purse and said nothing more. But she kept thinking about the way Elin had said difficult year. Not as a guess, not as a courtesy, but with the precision of someone who had read a file. Elin did not disappear. Most people from that kind of event did. A brief spark of apparent connection, then silence, then the quiet acknowledgement that it had meant nothing. Elin was different. She stayed present in the way that water stays present, without drama, without force, finding every available space. The week after the gathering, she sent a recommendation for an interior designer who, she said, had transformed 3 apartments in the same neighborhood. Unsolicited, thoughtful, specific enough to feel personal. 2 weeks later, a doctor's name arrived by text. The best in the city for what you mentioned, and he actually listens. Mia couldn't remember mentioning anything about doctors, but she filed the name away. Then came the invitation to a small dinner. Then a connection that moved David's job search forward faster than 2 months of independent effort had managed. Then a tip about a gallery opening that turned out to be exactly the kind of environment where the right kind of casual conversation happened. Each gesture arrived before it was asked for. That was the mechanism. Elin never waited for the request. She anticipated, then provided, then retreated just enough to make the provision feel like friendship rather than strategy. She's generous, David said one evening, genuinely impressed by something she'd arranged for him. She's precise, Mia replied. Is there a difference? Mia thought about it. Generosity doesn't need a return. Precision always does. David gave her the look, not unkind, but slightly tired. The look that said, you're searching for problems again. She recognized it. She had earned it, once, by being wrong about Caroline before she was right about her. That history gave him permission to doubt her instincts, and both of them knew it. She didn't push further, but something had settled in her, quiet and persistent, like a stone at the bottom of a clear pool. The package arrived on a Tuesday. No sender address, just their house number on a label that had been printed, not handwritten, careful in a way that could have been mistaken for anonymous if you weren't paying attention. Inside, a set of home items. Expensive, tasteful, unnecessary. A small ceramic lamp. A set of linen napkins in exactly the color Mia had mentioned, offhandedly, as something she liked. A book she'd said she wanted to read but hadn't gotten around to buying. At the bottom, a handwritten note on the same heavy cream paper as the business card. You shouldn't have to build everything alone. Mia read it twice. Then she brought it to David. Did you tell her what color I wanted for the side table? He looked at the napkins. No. Did you mention the book? No. He frowned. But maybe she just guessed well. She doesn't guess, Mia said. She researches. Mia, David. She had our address. You said you didn't give it to her. He was quiet for a moment. She probably got it from the event registration. These things share contact information. Mia folded the note carefully and placed it in the kitchen drawer. She didn't throw it away. She wasn't sure why. Perhaps because it felt like evidence, even if she didn't yet know what it was evidence of. Elin invited Mia for coffee alone 3 weeks later. The cafe was in a part of the city Mia hadn't been to yet. Quiet, expensive, the kind of place where the ambient noise level suggested that the conversations happening here were not accidental. Elin was already seated when Mia arrived. She had ordered water and was reading something on her phone with the focused calm of someone who treats waiting as productive time. She stood when Mia approached, smiled, gestured to the seat across from her. I'm glad you came, she said. I wasn't sure you would. Why wouldn't I? Elin considered the question with apparent seriousness. You don't fully trust me yet. Mia sat down. I don't fully know you. Most people treat those as the same thing. Elin picked up the menu with the practiced ease of someone who would order the same thing regardless of what it said. I found they're actually quite different. They ordered. The coffee arrived. Elin asked about the house, specific questions, genuine-sounding interest. Mia answered with the appropriate amount of detail and kept the rest of her attention on the texture of the conversation. The way Elin listened. The way she filed responses away behind her eyes without appearing to. Can I ask you something directly? Mia said at one point. Please. What do you get out of this? Out of being helpful to us. Elin set her cup down. For a moment, her expression did something complicated. Not offense, not amusement, but something closer to respect, as if the question had raised her estimation of Mia slightly. People either become useful in your life or they don't, she said. I've learned that the fastest way to be surrounded by interesting people is to be genuinely useful to them first. It's not altruism. It's also not manipulation. It's investment. In what? In the possibility that you become part of a world worth being in. It sounded reasonable. It sounded like the kind of philosophy a very organized, very successful person might actually hold. And that, Mia thought on the drive home, was exactly the problem. Everything Elin said sounded reasonable. Every action she took fit within the frame of a generous, well-connected woman who simply enjoyed helping people. The discomfort wasn't in anything Mia could point to. It was in the pattern. The dinner was Elin's idea. She described it as a closed evening, nothing formal. But the guest list told a different story. These were people David had been trying to get back in front of for months. Investors, consultants, the kind of men who made decisions over meals and called it coincidence. Mia didn't want to go. David insisted. These are exactly the connections I need right now, he said, adjusting his cufflinks in the bedroom mirror. I know, Mia said. That's what concerns me. He looked at her reflection. What do you mean? That she always knows exactly what we need. At exactly the right moment. He turned. Mia, she's helped us. Genuinely helped us. Why are you looking for something wrong with that? Because help that arrives before the need is expressed isn't help, she thought. It's control. But she didn't say it. She had said similar things before, and she had watched his expression do the same thing it was doing now. That careful neutrality that meant he was being patient with her. The way you are patient with someone who has been wrong before in ways that cost you. She got dressed. They went. The venue was a restored building in the older part of the city. High ceilings, dim light. The kind of architecture that makes you speak more quietly without understanding why. Elin met them at the entrance as if she were hosting something far more intimate than a dinner. Her hand rested briefly on David's arm as she welcomed him inside. I'm so glad you're both here, she said. Mia noticed how she distributed the words equally, but the warmth unevenly. Inside, the room had already organized itself into the familiar clusters of established relationships. Mia felt the particular discomfort of being new, not unwelcome, but unlayered, without the shared history that made other people's conversations feel like a language she hadn't quite learned. Elin guided David into a group immediately, introducing him to 3 men who already knew his name and performed polite surprise at meeting him. Mia stayed slightly back. She watched Elin move through the room. There was something almost beautiful about it, the calibrated warmth, The precise duration of each exchange, the way she left every cluster with the impression that she had given it her full attention. She was a social architect. Every conversation was load-bearing. Then, near the end of the evening, Mia found herself close enough to overhear a fragment of Elon's exchange with David. She wasn't trying to eavesdrop. She was simply standing in the wrong direction. The project, Elon was saying softly. The timing was genuinely unfortunate. David's posture changed. You know about that? Elin tilted her head with an expression of careful sympathy. Someone who worked adjacent to your firm mentioned it once. The leak. The way it spread. A pause. It must have been very difficult to rebuild after something like that. David's voice was controlled. It wasn't a leak. It was a breach of confidentiality. Of course. Elin nodded as if acknowledging a correction she respected. Then, I did hear something strange about it, actually. About where the information first surfaced. It was in connection with a lunch, wasn't it? She glanced toward Mia. Just briefly, just enough. Mia is so warm. I can see why people open up to her easily. The sentence rearranged the air. David looked at Elin more directly. What are you suggesting? She raised her hand slightly, as if retreating. Nothing at all. I probably shouldn't have said anything. It's almost certainly unrelated. But the word almost had already done its work. Mia, standing 3 feet away with her back partially turned, felt the moment like a drop in temperature. She turned just enough to see David's face, the careful stillness of someone processing something they hadn't been ready to process. That night, driving home, he was quiet. Not cold, not accusatory, just quiet in a new way. The question came the following morning. They were in the kitchen, coffee, morning light, the pretense of an ordinary day. David was reading something on his phone. Then he set it down. That lunch, he said. The one with Caroline. Was there anyone else there who might have passed it along before it reached her? Mia looked at him. What? I'm just trying to understand the chain. Elin said something last night. I heard what she said. Then you know what I'm asking. I know what she wanted you to ask, Mia said carefully. That's different. He looked at her. That look again, the patient one. Mia. She planted something. Deliberately. She implied I had a reason beyond carelessness. She set her cup down. David, I made a mistake. A stupid, costly mistake that I have spent 18 months trying to make up to you. I did not do it on purpose. There was no benefit to me. My father did not profit from your firm's collapse. None of that is true. Silence. I know, he said finally. Then why did you ask? He picked his phone up again. Because she made me forget I knew. It was the most honest thing he'd said in weeks. And it frightened both of them. The social sabotage was elegant. Mia understood it only in retrospect. The way you understand the architecture of a building only after you've been inside it long enough to notice which rooms don't have windows. It began with an invitation to a gathering for spouses. Nothing serious, Elin had said. Just a chance to meet the right people. Mia had gone reluctantly, told herself she was being open-minded, and spent 2 hours in a room where every question was framed just carefully enough to make a wrong answer inevitable. She gave a wrong answer. She mentioned, casually, in what she believed was a private moment, that she found the social expectations of the city exhausting. 2 days later, that sentiment had traveled, reshaped, to at least 4 different people, none of whom she'd told it to directly. Mia finds it hard to adjust. She's been under a lot of pressure. David seems fine, but the charity event was the decisive move. Mia had agreed to handle a contribution on behalf of their household. A symbolic donation at a high-profile fundraising evening, nothing complicated. She'd sent the confirmation email herself. She had the draft in her sent folder. When she arrived, the organizers looked at her with the polite confusion of people who have rehearsed bad news. We didn't receive your confirmation, the woman said. I sent it, Mia said. She showed the sent folder on her phone. The email was there, time-stamped, addressed correctly, with all the right information. The organizer looked at it without really looking at it. I'm afraid the allocation closed yesterday. The slot was given to another family. Mia left, and within 48 hours, the interpretation had hardened. The new couple had failed to follow through on a public commitment. In a world where reputation was currency, they had bounced a check. David found out through a message from one of the host families. Polite, formal, and irreversible. This is going to reflect badly, he said, reading it. I sent the confirmation, Mia said. I can show you. I believe you sent it. He set his phone down. I'm just saying the result is the same. The result is what she arranged, Mia said. He looked at her, and she saw it then, not disbelief, but something worse. Exhaustion. The weariness of a man who had been carrying doubt for weeks and was running out of reasons to keep it pointed in one direction. Every problem has her name on it, he said. Every time something goes wrong, Elin is the explanation. Don't you hear how that sounds? I hear how she's made it sound, Mia replied. He didn't answer. He picked up his jacket and said he needed air. The door closed behind him with the careful quietness of someone trying not to slam it. Mia sat alone in the kitchen and felt the house around her, its clean walls, its soft light, its expensive silence, and understood, for the first time clearly, that it had never been a home. It had been a stage, and they had walked onto it without knowing who had written the play. She started digging that afternoon. Not dramatically, no sudden inspiration, no cinematic breakthrough. Just a woman at a laptop, following a thread. She started with Elin's name and worked backward through event photographs, tagged social posts, archived articles from years past. She looked at the people who appeared in Elin's orbit and then followed what happened to them afterward. The pattern, once she saw it, was impossible to unsee. 3 years ago, a gallery owner named Petra, described in 2 separate archived articles as erratic and difficult to work with, had left the city abruptly after a public falling out with several prominent donors. One of those donors was photographed with Elin at a charity gala 6 months before. 2 years ago, a consultant named James had been publicly accused of misappropriating client funds. The accusation turned out to be false, but by the time it was corrected, his practice was gone. His wife had given a single interview, deleted from the original publication but preserved in a cached version. The woman who introduced us to those clients knew exactly what she was doing. No name given. No charges filed. Nothing provable. And then, Thomas. She found him in a tagged photograph from an industry event. A tall man in his mid-40s, standing beside Elin with the slightly stiff posture of someone who had recently stopped feeling comfortable in formal settings. The tag named him. She clicked it. His profile was sparse. Architect. Former partner at a firm she recognized. Then nothing. No posts, no activity, no updated location, for almost 3 years. But the comments on his last post remained. Most were generic expressions of concern. One wasn't. She does this to everyone who outlives their utility. No name. No context. Posted and never replied to. Mia wrote down the username. She found a city forum where the same handle appeared. She cross-referenced. It took 2 hours. She found a name. An address. A town 200 miles away. She looked at the address for a long time. Then she looked at the kitchen drawer where she'd put Elin's note. You shouldn't have to build everything alone. She closed the laptop. She went upstairs. She packed a small bag. She did not tell David where she was going. The town was smaller than she'd expected, not remote, just unhurried, the way certain places are when they've stopped competing with anywhere else. Buildings that had made peace with their age. Streets that didn't advertise themselves. She'd driven the 200 miles in a strange calm, the kind that arrives when a decision has already been made and the only thing left is its execution. The radio stayed off. The silence in the car felt useful, like a space where she could arrange her thoughts before they were tested. She found the address in the early afternoon. A modest house on a quiet street. Tidy, but not curated. Maintained the way a person maintains things when they've stopped caring about appearances and started caring only about function. A small garden that looked like it had been planted by someone learning to be patient. She sat in the car for a few minutes. This is stupid, she thought. This is the kind of thing people do in films right before something goes wrong. She got out. She knocked. The man who opened the door was somewhere in his mid-40s. He did not look unstable. That was the first thing she registered. He looked like someone who had been through a sustained and specific kind of pressure and had come out the other side, not broken exactly, but differently weighted. Tired in the way that doesn't go away with sleep. His eyes went from her face to the street behind her, then back. Yes. Thomas. Something crossed his expression. Not fear. Recognition with a tight lid on it. Who sent you? No one. I found your name through old event photographs. And through a comment someone left on your last post. He was still. Which comment? She repeated it. He stepped back from the door, not retreating, but making a decision. After a moment, he opened it wider. Inside, the house was clean and minimal in a way that suggested deliberate reduction. like someone who had stripped their life down to what was genuinely necessary and discovered the result was peaceful. Books, a few plants, a kitchen that smelled of coffee, no decorative objects, nothing that announced itself. He didn't offer her a seat immediately. He stood in the middle of the room, arms loosely crossed, and studied her. "You know Elin," he said finally. It was not a question. "She came into our lives about 4 months ago." He closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, he looked at her with an expression she hadn't expected, something close to grief. "How far along is it?" "What do you mean?" "The isolation. Has she started on your husband yet?" Made him doubt you. Mia felt the words land precisely. "Yes." Thomas moved to a chair and sat. She sat across from him, on the edge of the couch. "Tell me what she's done," he said. So she did. She laid it out as precisely as she could. The gifts, the timing, the coffee conversation, the dinner, the planted doubt, the charity event, the email that had been received by everyone except the people who needed to receive it. She spoke for almost 20 minutes without interruption. Thomas listened with the stillness of someone who has heard a story before and is checking it against a version they already know. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "She's ahead of where she was with me," he said. "By the time she started the isolation with me, I didn't have anyone left who believed me." "Tell me what happened," Mia said. He looked at the wall. When he spoke, his voice was steady, the steadiness of someone who has repeated something enough times that it has lost its ability to destabilize him. "I met her at a professional event. My firm was doing well. We were expanding. She attached herself to that expansion, to me, in exactly the way she attached herself to you. Useful, precise, always one step ahead of what you needed." He paused. "I didn't notice it happening. That's the thing. You never do. It feels like fortune, like finally having the right person in your corner. And then the people around me started seeing a different version of me. I didn't know she was building that version. I just knew that conversations that should have gone one way went another, that my professional judgment started being questioned, that my partners began treating me with a particular kind of careful concern that meant they'd already decided something. What was the breaking point? A contract. I was in the final stages of securing a large development project, the kind of thing that would have defined the next decade of the firm. Elin was involved peripherally as a social connection. The lead investor was someone in her network. He stopped. The contract went to someone else 3 days before signing. No explanation. When I tried to reach the investor, I got his assistant. Then silence. And Elin was very kind about it. Sympathetic. These things happen. She helped me process the disappointment. His mouth flattened. While she was processing it for him, Mia felt cold. "You can't prove it." "I couldn't then." He stood up and walked to the bookshelf. Old, heavy, lined with folders as much as books. He pulled one out. "But I had a meeting with her. About 3 months before I left the city. She was already preparing the next stage. She was starting to make the people around me believe I was becoming unstable. I knew it. I could feel the shape of it, even if I couldn't prove the individual moves." He set the folder on the table between them. "So I recorded her." Mia looked at the folder. She thought it was a private conversation. Thomas continued. "She was explaining to me, in the way she does, where everything sounds like advice, that certain situations require managing perception before perception manages you. She talked about how she'd handled other situations. Other people." He looked at Mia. "She doesn't think she's a predator. She thinks she's an editor. She believes she's removing what doesn't work and keeping what does. And the recording is in that folder, along with documentation of everything I could reconstruct, dates, names, sequences." He sat back down. "I kept it because I needed to know I wasn't insane. And because I told myself that someday someone would come here who needed it more than I did." Mia reached out and opened the folder. The recording was on a small digital device, nestled among printed pages covered in neat, dated notes. She could see the precision in his record-keeping, the handwriting of someone who had decided that exactness was the only thing he had left to trust. She read for several minutes without speaking. Then she looked at him. "Why didn't you use this before?" "Because I was afraid." He said it without apology. She had made sure that every person who might have listened to me had already been given a reason not to. And she has a lawyer who sends letters before anything reaches the level of public. He paused. "I wasn't just afraid of losing. I was afraid of what losing again would do to me. And now," he looked at her steadily, "now I'm afraid of what happens if I keep waiting." Mia sat with that for a moment. Then she said, "If I take this, she'll know." "Yes." "And she'll accelerate." "Yes." He met her eyes. "But she was going to accelerate anyway. The only difference is whether you're ready when she does." Mia picked up the digital recorder. It was lighter than she expected. She placed it carefully in her bag. "Thank you," she said. Thomas nodded. He looked, she thought, like someone who had just put down something heavy. Not free, not yet, but lighter. "Be careful," he said as she stood. "And don't wait for perfect proof." She doesn't wait for perfect anything. She drove back in the dark. The folder sat on the passenger seat. She was aware of it the way you're aware of something important that you're not yet sure how to use, with the particular alertness of someone who has acquired a key but hasn't yet found the lock. She had listened to the recording twice during a rest stop. Elon's voice was clear, calm, deliberate, speaking in the private register of someone who doesn't know they're being heard. The content was not dramatic. That was what made it devastating. She was not ranting, not threatening. She was simply describing, with the practical clarity of someone discussing project management, how she had reframed the perception of a specific individual, how she had managed the sequence, how she had ensured that certain information reached certain people at certain moments. He believed his partners turned on him, Elon said on the recording. They didn't. They were guided. Mia had sat in a rest stop parking lot and listened to a woman describe the dismantling of a human life the way an architect describes a demolition. She arrived home to find the lights on. Her first thought, David was home early. Her second thought, arriving a fraction of a second later, was that the light quality was wrong, too organized, too even, like someone had walked through the house and made it ready for something. She opened the door. Elon was standing near the kitchen entrance. David was on the couch. The scene had the arranged quality of something that had been prepared. Elon in a position of calm authority. David seated, not relaxed, held in place by something she couldn't immediately name. Mia stopped in the doorway. "What is she doing here?" she asked. Her voice was steady. She was faintly surprised by that. "She came to talk," David said. "I called her." Mia looked at him. "Why did you call her?" He glanced at Elon. The glance itself was its own answer. "We were worried about you," Elon said. Her voice was warm with concern, so precisely calibrated it hurt to hear. "You left without telling anyone where you were going." David was frightened. "I went for a drive." 200 miles? Mia said nothing. Elon stepped slightly forward. "Mia, the people around you have been noticing changes. I've been trying to protect you from the full weight of that, but I think you need to hear it directly. What you're experiencing, the suspicion, the pattern finding, the need to investigate, stop." The word came out quiet and flat. Elon stopped. "I know what you're doing," Mia said. "And I know why you're doing it tonight specifically. Because I was gone today. Because you don't know what I found." Elon's expression didn't change. But something behind it did. A tiny recalibration, so brief that if Mia hadn't been watching for it, she would have missed it entirely. "David," Elon said, without looking away from Mia, "I think we should call someone. A professional. Just to." A knock at the door. David stood automatically. Elon moved to the door before either of them could. She opened it herself. 2 police officers stood on the porch. Mia felt the air leave the room. "We received a wellness check request," the lead officer said. His eyes moved through the space with the practiced efficiency of someone looking for signs of a specific situation. Elon turned slightly toward David with an expression of exhausted concern. "I had to call them," she said quietly. "I was worried about the self-harm risk. I should have told you." David looked at her. Then he looked at Mia. And Mia watched him do the thing she had been afraid of. She watched him calculate. Not is this true, but what happens if it is? The math of a man who had been slowly, carefully taught to locate the risk in her direction. "Officers," Mia said, her voice level. "I'm fine. I went for a drive. I came home. I am standing in front of you having a calm conversation." The lead officer looked between her and Elon. Elon gave a small, tragic shake of her head. And something in Mia shifted, not despair, but clarity. She was watching the mechanism in real time. She was watching Elon operate the room the way Thomas had described, not by force, but by placement, by making herself the center of the frame so that everything else was measured against her. She thought, "Not here. Not tonight." "David," she said, "tell them I'm fine." A beat. Then he stood up. "She's fine," he said. "Thank you for coming." It was a misunderstanding. Elon didn't argue. She didn't need to. The call had been made. The officers had been there. The image existed now, whether anyone named it or not. She left shortly after, expressing quiet concern at the doorway, letting David walk her out. Mia stood in the living room and listened to the silence after the door closed. That night she didn't sleep. She sat at the kitchen table with Thomas's folder spread in front of her and went through every page. She cross-referenced what he had documented with what she had experienced. She built the sequence from the beginning, not as a feeling, not as an instinct, but as a chain of events that could be laid end to end and examined. By 3 in the morning, it was no longer a theory. It was a structure. She called Thomas at 7. "I need you to come," she said. A pause. "If I come," he said, "I want you to understand what that means for me." "I know." Another pause. "Elin will see me." "Yes." "And she'll know what I brought." "Yes." The line was quiet for a moment. Then, "Tell me the plan." Elin's gatherings had a particular quality, the warmth of something that had been precisely designed to feel undesigned. The garden of the rented estate glowed with soft, expensive lighting. Guests moved between clusters with the ease of people who were comfortable being watched. Champagne arrived without being summoned. The right conversations happened in the right order. Elin moved through it all like a conductor who didn't need a baton. Mia and David arrived together. She had told him, that morning, as much as she could without showing him the folder. She didn't have proof, she'd said. She had a lead. She had something she needed him to trust her about. One more time, for one more hour. He had looked at her for a long time. "What are you going to do?" he asked. "Show you what I've been seeing," she said, "and let you decide what it means." He had agreed, not with full confidence, but with the particular willingness of a man who knows he has been drifting and isn't entirely sure from what. Elin saw them arrive. Her smile reached them across the garden with practiced warmth. And then she saw Thomas. She was mid-sentence with a group of guests. Her voice did not falter. Her expression did not change. But she went still in the way that only Mia, watching for it, could have detected. A fraction of a second in which the calculation ran. Then she excused herself from the group and came toward them. Mia, warm. David, warmer. And then, to Thomas, with a smile so composed it was almost admirable. "I don't think we've met." "We have," Thomas said. The smile held. "I'm sorry, I meet so many people." "I know," he said. "That's what you count on." The garden continued around them. Conversations floated. Ice shifted in glasses. Somewhere nearby, 2 men laughed at something. Elin glanced toward the nearest cluster of guests, checking, Mia registered, whether she was being observed. Then she turned back with the expression she deployed for fragile situations. Gentle, concerned, infinitely patient. "Mia," she said softly, "I'm not sure what you've been told, but I want you to know. I'd like you to listen to something," Mia said. She took out the recorder. Not dramatically. The way you take something out of a bag when you know exactly where it is and exactly what you're going to do with it. "This is private property," Elin said. Her voice had shifted, still controlled, but with a new edge beneath it. "Whatever you think you have," Mia pressed play. Elin's own voice filled the air between them. Calm, deliberate, speaking in the private register of someone who believed they were unheard. He believed his partners turned on him. They didn't. They were guided. A pause on the recording. Then, the key is to manage the sequence before the subject recognizes there is a sequence. Once they see the pattern, you've already lost the room. The garden slowed. Not silence. The sounds continued. The conversations persisted. But something shifted in the immediate vicinity. A man nearby had stopped speaking mid-sentence. A woman turned slightly, her glass halfway to her mouth. On the recording, Elin's voice continued. "She's useful for now. But these situations always reach a point where the liability outweighs the function. When that happens, you remove the element before it can remove itself." Mia stopped the recording. She looked at Elin. Elin was looking at the recorder with the expression of someone calculating not their innocence, but their options. And in that expression, in that brief, precise, operational look, David saw something. Mia watched him see it. She watched the thing that had been slowly built in him over 4 months. The accumulated weight of planted doubt, of strategic disappointment, of a woman who had offered certainty when his wife seemed to offer only instability. She watched it crack. Not shatter. Crack. But it was enough. "That's my voice," Elin said finally. Composed. In a private conversation that was recorded without my consent. Anything on that recording is inadmissible and, Thomas, Mia said. He stepped forward, and Elin stopped speaking, because she knew what Thomas being here meant. She knew what he had. She knew what 4 months of patient documentation looked like when it was finally picked up and carried somewhere. The metadata on that recording, Thomas said, shows the date, time, and location. The location is your office. The date is 6 weeks before you filed the complaint against me with the licensing board. He looked at her. I also have the emails. The ones you sent to 3 separate people before the complaint was filed, each of which contained a slightly different version of the same story about my instability. Written in your tone, from your address. Elin looked at him, then at Mia, then at David. David looked back at her, and the look on his face was something Mia hadn't seen in months. Not anger, not accusation, but the particular quiet of a person who has just realized they were standing in a different room than they thought. This is, Elin began. People are listening, Mia said quietly. Not all of them, but enough. It was true. The immediate circle of the party had reorganized itself. Not gathered, not staring, but oriented. The way people orient when they sense something that matters is happening nearby. Elin looked at them for a long moment. Her face did something complicated, a final calculation, the assessment of costs and available moves. Then she straightened. She gave a small, controlled smile. Enjoy the evening, she said. And she walked away, not running, not visibly rattled, but walking in a direction that was away from all of them, and away from the people who were now, quietly and irrevocably, looking at her differently. Nothing ended dramatically. That was the truth of it, the part that real life insists on even when narrative would prefer a cleaner finish. Elin did not confess. No one called the police. The party continued, and then it ended, and people went home with new things to think about that they hadn't arrived with. But something had changed in the room. The particular power Elin held depended on a specific condition, that she was the only one who knew the full shape of what she was doing. The recording hadn't proved anything legally. Thomas's documentation hadn't triggered an investigation. What it had done was simpler and more permanent. It had let people see the seam. In the weeks that followed, her influence didn't collapse. It contracted. Invitations that had previously flowed through her stopped flowing. Recommendations she made were double-checked. The small social trust she had accumulated and spent so carefully became a currency people were suddenly reluctant to use. She did not go quietly. There were 2 pointed phone calls, to David, not Mia. There was a letter from a lawyer that said very little of substance, but arrived on heavy paper. There was a brief, gracious message to their social circle that described a difficult misunderstanding with a troubled acquaintance, which nearly everyone read correctly. David showed Mia every communication. He did not respond to any of them without talking to her first. That, more than anything, told her what had shifted. Thomas came by the house once, a week after the garden. He didn't stay long. He sat in the kitchen, the same kitchen where Mia had first run her fingers along the counter and thought, "This doesn't feel like ours," and drank a coffee and seemed to be processing something he hadn't fully arrived at yet. "How are you?" Mia asked. "Strange," he said. "I thought it would feel like more than this." He looked at his hands. "Vindication, or something. But mostly it just feels like I can stop carrying it." "That's something." "It's something," he agreed. Before he left, he turned in the doorway. "She'll find somewhere else," he said. "You know that." "I know. She'll find someone who doesn't have what you had." "Which is?" He considered. "Each other," he said. "People like her find it hardest to work around 2 people who choose each other clearly. She needed the gap between you. You just had to close it." He left. Mia stood in the doorway for a while after his car disappeared. The decision to sell the house came on a Sunday morning. No conversation led to it. No argument. No negotiation. David was standing at the kitchen window with his coffee, looking at the perfectly maintained garden, and he said, "We should sell it." Mia looked up from her book. "Okay." He turned. "Just like that. We never really moved in," she said. "We just stored things here." He nodded. Then he sat down across from her. "I want to tell you something," he said. She waited. "There were moments, over the last few months, when I chose to believe the easier version. The one that didn't require me to trust you when trusting you felt complicated." He looked at the table. "That wasn't about you. It was about me being afraid that I'd already lost too much to afford being wrong again." Mia was quiet for a moment. "I know," she said. "I'm sorry. I know that too." She reached across and put her hand over his. I'm also sorry. For the lunch. For Caroline. For the thing that made it possible for her to use it against us. He turned his hand over and held hers. We're going to be very careful, he said, about who we let into things. Yes, she said. We are. They sat like that for a while, in the kitchen of a house they had almost lost themselves inside. And outside the window, the perfectly maintained garden continued to look exactly like what it was. Beautiful, impersonal, and entirely someone else's idea of what a life should look like. They drove to the coast. Not a plan, more of an agreement that they needed to go somewhere that didn't know them. They rented a small house 3 hours from the city, wood floors, sea air, windows that rattled in the wind with cheerful indifference to elegance. They walked on the first evening. The beach at that hour was almost empty. A few distant figures, a dog pursuing something at the waterline, the long, unbroken sound of waves that didn't care about any of it. Mia felt something loosen in her chest that she hadn't realized was still held tight. David stopped near the waterline. The water came up and retreated around their shoes, cold and indifferent. I keep trying to find the exact moment, he said. When I stopped seeing you and started seeing the version of you she was building. Did you find it? No. He looked at the horizon. I think that's the point. There isn't a moment. It's a gradient. That's what makes it work. Mia watched the water pull back from the sand. I lost myself in it for a while too, she said, wondering if my instincts were real or paranoid, whether I was seeing clearly or seeing too much. She paused. That's what she wanted. For both of us to become uncertain enough that we needed her to define what was real. David was quiet. Then, what do you want? Not from this trip. Generally. She thought about it genuinely. Not the answer that sounded right, but the actual answer. I want something we built without anyone's permission, she said. Not a house in a neighborhood that other people told us was the right kind of neighborhood. Not a version of our life organized around being acceptable to the right people. She looked at the water. Something real. Even if it's smaller. Even if it's harder. He reached into his jacket pocket and put something on the flat rock beside them. She looked at it. A folded property listing. She picked it up. A farmhouse. Old, plainly photographed, looking slightly tired in the way that suggests room rather than ruin. 40 minutes from a town she'd never heard of. Listed at a price that was reasonable precisely because it needed work. She looked at him. I thought we could look at it, he said. If you want. She unfolded the listing fully. Read the description: stone foundation, original beams, 2 acres, derelict kitchen garden. The photograph showed a front door painted red, chipped at the bottom corner. This needs everything, she said. Yes, he agreed. That's the point, isn't it? That's the point. She folded it back up and held it. Around them, the evening light was doing what evening light on the coast does, slow, generous, entirely uninterested in the business of the people standing beneath it. They stood there for a while without speaking, which was something they hadn't been able to do in months without the silence meaning something difficult. Now it just meant, here, together, beginning. The sea continued without them. The listing stayed in her hand. And somewhere behind them, far away in a city with trimmed hedges and curated silences, a woman named Elin was already looking at new coordinates, running the same calculations, preparing the same first moves. But she was no longer looking in their direction. And that, for now, was everything.